All right, let's dive right into this newly declassified explainer on the 1970 Isdalen anomaly. Consider this your official detective briefing. Today, we're unpacking a massive counterintelligence failure that stayed unsolved for over 50 years, and looking at the absolute leaps in modern science it took to finally crack the case of the ghost of Death Valley.
Here's our dossier for today's briefing. We're going to hit the incident report, analyze the operative's tradecraft, dig deep into the forensic breakthroughs, identify our target, and wrap up with the postmortem.
Okay, Section 1, Incident Report, Ice Valley. We're heading back to the morning of November 29, 1970, out in the foggy, remote foothills of Mount Ulriken in Norway, a rocky stretch the locals literally call Death Valley.
Picture this. A university professor is out hiking the scree with his two young daughters when they notice this really pungent smell of burnt flesh. They spot what looks like a charred branch, but it was actually a blackened human hand. The corpse was frozen in what we call the boxer position, arms raised, fists clenched, which is a known physiological reaction to extreme heat and fire. But it wasn't just a body. Scattered around her was this bizarre, almost ceremonial arrangement of jewelry, a watch, and some bottles, all placed with absolute chilling precision.
Now, this is the part that completely baffled the 1970s detectives. Look at this deliberate eraser protocol. Every single identifying mark, neutralized. The labels on her clothes were meticulously cut out. The markings on those carefully arranged bottles had been rubbed completely off. And most horrifying of all, her fingerprints had been physically sanded away. She was a total ghost. They had absolutely zero ways to identify her.
Moving to Section 2, the operative's tradecraft. So how on earth do you track a ghost? Well, 3 days later, one tiny slip-up blew the whole deception wide open. Turns out you can't erase everything. Investigators actually managed to pull a single partial fingerprint off a pair of sunglasses found near the scene. And that print? It linked her to two suitcases abandoned at the Bergen railway station. Inside, operatives found a literal textbook master of disguise toolkit. We're talking multiple wigs, non-prescription glasses, and just stacks of currency from all over Europe. Oh, and there was a tube of eczema cream, but true to form, the prescription label was completely scraped off to hide the doctor's name. Actually, keep that eczema cream in the back of your mind. It's going to be absolutely crucial later on.
These suitcases brilliantly illustrate her field ops. Police used clues from them to track her across Norway. She used at least 8 different aliases: Genevieve, Claudia, Alexia. She claimed to be a Belgian antiquities dealer, but shocker, every address she gave was totally fake. She spoke English, German, and French. She had a noticeable gap in her front teeth and smelled heavily of garlic. But look at her behavior. She was running aggressive counter-surveillance, constantly switching hotel rooms, sometimes 3 times during a single stay, and witnesses saw her meeting with unidentified men in dark coats. Real spy movie stuff.
So what was the end game here? Declassified files later confirmed her movements directly mirrored the highly classified trials of the Norwegian military's NATO Penguin missile system. She was actively observing these tests. Now, despite all this textbook espionage tradecraft and hotel staff finding her sitting in frosty absolute silence with unknown men, the local police hastily labeled it a simple suicide by sleeping pills. They closed the case fast, which obviously sparked heavy suspicions that the Norwegian Secret Service had stepped in to cover it up.
Right, let's jump to Section 3. Forensic breakthrough, isotope analysis. This case was literally frozen in time until 2016, when researchers finally got permission to open her zinc coffin and bring in modern science. The absolute game changer for this briefing is isotope analysis. If you don't know how this works, it's fascinating. As you grow up, the local water you drink and the food you eat leave behind unique chemical signatures in your teeth enamel. By studying these isotopes, modern forensic scientists can effectively read your teeth like a map, pinpointing exactly where you spent your childhood.
And just look at the contrast here. The 1970s detectives figured she was just some unknown Norwegian local with unidentifiable dental work. But the modern isotope findings? They completely destroyed that narrative. The chemical signatures proved she wasn't Norwegian at all. She actually grew up near Nuremberg, right along the France-Germany border. On top of that, dental experts realized her gold crowns used very specific techniques taught in East Germany during the 1950s. She was definitely a product of the Eastern Bloc.
Now, because she was buried in a zinc coffin, her remains were remarkably preserved. This allowed the 2016 team to escalate their protocol. Step 1, they extracted a viable partial DNA profile straight from her jawbone.
Step 2 was the isotope analysis we just talked about, and Step 3 was the masterstroke, using that extracted DNA to bridge the data gap through genetic genealogy.
Which brings us to Section 4, Target Identified. By 2025, that extracted DNA finally gave us a definitive match, ending a 55-year-old mystery.
To pull this off, the scientists used a revolutionary technique called CANA, or Converging Ancestry Network Analysis. Basically, they cross-referenced her partial DNA with these massive modern family tree databases, and it worked. Genealogists traced her genetic helix straight to a specific family tree in Dresden, Germany. And just like that, the ghost of Death Valley had a name. Born in 1934, she was Margot Elise Hoffman. No, she wasn't an antiquities dealer, and she certainly wasn't just a lost hiker. She was a highly trained operative for the Stasi, East Germany's infamous Ministry for State Security.
Let's look at her unclassified operative profile. Margot was a chemist by trade, specifically recruited by the Stasi for her technical know-how. Her mission in Norway was to infiltrate NATO research facilities and steal highly classified data on underwater sonar detection systems, stuff that was absolutely critical for tracking Soviet subs. But things went south. Modern surveillance photos and intel show that in her final days, she was actively being tailed by Western intelligence. She was a pawn caught in the invisible war.
Finally, Section 5, Postmortem, the Wick Effect. We know who she was, we know her mission, but we still need to analyze the clinical mechanics of how Margot Hoffman actually died out there in the ice.
I want you to focus on this number, 50 to 70. That is how many undigested sleep-in pills the original autopsy found in her stomach. That's a massive lethal dose. But here is the crazy forensic contradiction. The medical examiner also found soot deep inside her lungs. That definitively proves that even with 70 pills in her system, she was still alive and breathing when the fire started.
Modern forensic experts push back hard against the Rush 1970 suicide ruling. The police wanted it wrapped up neatly, but modern analysts look at the evidence and propose a much darker theory. One driven by the extreme operational paranoia of a burned spy who knew Western intelligence was closing in.
So here's what the current scientific consensus says actually went down. A gruesome phenomenon known as the Wick Effect. Step 1. Hoffman knows she's compromised, so she takes a fatal dose of pills to silence herself. Step 2. In total paranoia, she tries to burn her final passport and documents to protect her identity and her handlers. Now, Step 3 is where it all goes wrong. Remember that scraped tube of eczema cream from her suitcase? It was a highly flammable prescription called Betnavat. She'd been using it for weeks, meaning her clothing was literally saturated in it. A stray ember from the burning passport caught her clothes. And Step 4, her clothing acted like a wick, while her body fat acted as the fuel. It caused this incredibly intense, localized burning that incinerated her front, but left her back almost completely untouched.
Margot Elise Hoffman lived her life in the shadows and died in a fire that literally erased her face. It took modern isotope analysis and DNA genealogy over half a century to finally bring her home. But the big takeaway from this explainer is just the terrifying perfection of Cold War tradecraft. She was almost successfully erased from history. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? As we wrap up today's briefing, how many other phantoms from that invisible war are still out there, buried in the ice, just waiting for modern science to finally unearth them? Thanks for joining me for this one. Keep questioning and keep learning.